Al Capone was one of the most infamous criminals in American history, rising to power during the Prohibition era of the 1920s and 1930s. Born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1899 to Italian immigrant parents, Capone became involved in street gangs at an early age. He eventually moved to Chicago, where he joined the criminal organization led by Johnny Torrio. After Torrio was injured in an assassination attempt in 1925, Capone took over the operation. Under his leadership, the group became a massive bootlegging empire, earning millions of dollars annually by illegally producing and distributing alcohol at a time when the sale of alcohol was banned nationwide. Capone's organization was not limited to bootlegging. It controlled gambling, prostitution, and other illicit rackets across Chicago. He built his empire using both bribery and violence. Bribery ensured police officers and politicians looked the other way, while violence kept rivals and disloyal members in line. His gang used machine guns and bombings, spreading fear throughout the city. One of the most notorious incidents linked to Capone was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, when 7 members of a rival gang were lined up against a wall and executed. While Capone was never formally convicted for that crime, the massacre symbolized the extreme brutality of organized crime during his reign. Despite his ability to avoid conviction for violent crimes, Capone was eventually brought down through financial charges. Federal investigators, led by Eliot Ness and the so-called Untouchables, built a case against him for tax evasion. In 1931, Capone was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. He was sent to Alcatraz, the maximum security prison on an island in San Francisco Bay, where his power and influence could no longer reach. Over time, his health deteriorated due to untreated syphilis, and he was released in 1939 before dying in 1947. Al Capone's career showed how organized crime could grow when law enforcement was weak and corruption was widespread. But it also proved that even the most powerful criminal figures could be undone by persistent investigation. Pablo Escobar was the leader of the Medellin cartel in Colombia and became the most powerful drug trafficker of the 1980s and early 1990s. Born in 1949, Escobar grew up in Medellin and began his criminal career with small-scale smuggling and theft before moving into the cocaine trade. By the early 1980s, he controlled an enormous share of the world's cocaine market. His cartel was smuggling hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States each year, making billions of dollars annually. At the height of his power, Escobar's wealth made him one of the richest men in the world. Escobar relied on both violence and corruption to maintain control. His motto was often described as plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead. Politicians, judges, police, and journalists were offered bribes, and if they refused, they often became targets of assassination. His cartel carried out bombings, kidnappings, and mass killings to intimidate both the government and the public. In 1989, a bomb ordered by Escobar destroyed Avianca Flight 203, killing 110 people in an attempt to kill a presidential candidate who opposed him. Escobar also funded the murder of hundreds of police officers in Medellin to weaken law enforcement pressure. At the same time, Escobar tried to build a reputation as a Robin Hood figure. He invested some of his wealth into building housing projects, sports fields, and schools in poor neighborhoods. This won him loyalty from parts of the local population, who protected him from authorities. In 1982, he was even elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress, though his ties to drug trafficking soon forced him out of politics. The Colombian government, with support from the United States, launched a long campaign to dismantle Escobar's cartel. After years of pursuit, Escobar was tracked down and killed by Colombian police in Medellin in December 1993. His death marked the decline of the Medellin cartel, though cocaine trafficking continued through other organizations. Pablo Escobar remains one of the most notorious criminals in history because of the scale of his empire, the violence he unleashed, and the impact his cartel had on global drug trafficking. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán was the longtime leader of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most dominant drug trafficking organizations in Mexico. Born in 1957 in a rural part of Sinaloa State, Guzmán grew up in poverty and entered the drug trade at a young age. He worked under other traffickers before rising through the ranks and eventually founding the Sinaloa cartel in the late 1980s. By the 1990s and 2000s, his cartel controlled the largest share of drugs entering the United States, including cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine. El Chapo became infamous for his ability to evade law enforcement. He was first captured in 1993 in Guatemala and sentenced to 20 years in prison in Mexico. However, in 2001, he escaped by hiding in a laundry cart, allegedly with the help of prison guards. After more than a decade on the run, Guzmán was recaptured in 2014, only to escape again in 2015 through a mile-long tunnel dug into his prison cell's shower. This escape showed both the cartel's immense resources and the deep corruption within Mexican institutions. He was finally recaptured in 2016 after a dramatic shootout with Mexican Marines and extradited to the United States in 2017. The Sinaloa cartel under El Chapo operated with extreme violence. It used assassinations, kidnappings, and public displays of brutality to maintain dominance over rivals and to intimidate civilians. At the same time, Guzmán relied on sophisticated strategies, such as building cross-border tunnels to smuggle drugs into the United States and forming alliances with other trafficking groups. His cartel grew into a global operation, earning billions of dollars and spreading influence across multiple continents. In 2019, El Chapo was convicted in a U.S. federal court on charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, and involvement in organized crime. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years and sent to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, one of the most secure prisons in the United States. Despite his imprisonment, the Sinaloa cartel continues to operate, though under different leadership. El Chapo remains notorious for his vast drug empire, his repeated escapes, and the sheer scale of violence linked to his rule. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were an American criminal couple active during the Great Depression. They became infamous for a string of robberies, murders, and prison breaks in the early 1930s. Clyde Barrow, born in 1909 in Texas, had already been involved in theft and small-scale crime before meeting Bonnie Parker in 1930. Bonnie, born in 1910, was drawn into Clyde's criminal lifestyle after the two quickly became inseparable. Together, they formed the core of what became known as the Barrow Gang, which included various accomplices over time. The gang targeted small businesses, gas stations, and rural banks, preferring easier targets instead of heavily guarded institutions. Although they gained little financial reward from most robberies, their willingness to use violence made them particularly feared. They killed multiple police officers and civilians during confrontations, creating a reputation for ruthlessness. Their exploits were heavily reported in newspapers, and photographs of Bonnie posing with guns or cigars contributed to their myth as outlaw lovers who defied authority. Bonnie and Clyde were constantly on the run, moving across Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and other states. They lived in stolen cars, relied on safe houses, and engaged in shootouts with law enforcement. Clyde also carried out prison breaks to free fellow gang members, further cementing the gang's notoriety. The FBI and local law enforcement pursued them relentlessly, but their mobility and support from sympathizers allowed them to evade capture for years. Their criminal career ended violently on May 23, 1934. Acting on a tip, a posse of lawmen ambushed Bonnie and Clyde near Bienville Parish, Louisiana. Their car was riddled with bullets, and both were killed instantly. After their deaths, crowds gathered to view their bodies, reflecting both the public's fascination and revulsion. Bonnie and Clyde remain infamous as symbols of Depression-era lawlessness, their story blending crime, romance, and violence in a way that has been retold in countless books and films. Billy the Kid, whose real name was Henry McCarty, but who also used the alias William H. Bonney, became one of the most notorious outlaws of the American Old West. Born in 1859, he was orphaned at a young age and turned to petty theft before becoming involved in cattle rustling and gunfighting. His reputation as a skilled and daring gunman grew quickly, and by his late teens, he had already killed several men. Billy the Kid's fame rose during the Lincoln County War, New Mexico, a violent conflict in the late 1870s between rival groups of ranchers and businessmen fighting for control of cattle and trade. Billy joined a faction called the Regulators, who opposed the powerful Murphy-Dolan faction. During the war, he participated in ambushes, raids, and gunfights, gaining notoriety as both a fighter and a fugitive. Historians believe he killed at least 8 men, though legends often exaggerated the number. Despite being painted as a ruthless outlaw, Billy the Kid was also seen by some as a folk hero. Stories circulated about his charm, quick reflexes, and youthful defiance of authority. His ability to escape custody added to his legend. In 1880, Sheriff Pat Garrett captured him, but Billy escaped from jail in April 1881 by killing 2 deputies. This bold escape shocked the public and cemented his reputation as an unstoppable outlaw. Billy the Kid's life ended shortly after his escape. On July 14, 1881, Sheriff Garrett tracked him down to a ranch near Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Garrett shot him dead at the age of 21. His short life, violent career, and dramatic death ensured that Billy the Kid became a lasting figure in Wild West folklore. He remains one of the most famous examples of how real violence and myth blended together in America's frontier history. John Dillinger was a notorious American bank robber during the Great Depression, whose crime spree made him one of the most feared criminals of the 1930s. Born in Indiana in 1903, Dillinger grew up in a working-class family but turned to petty theft and burglary in his youth. After serving prison time for robbery, he emerged hardened and more deeply connected to the criminal underworld. By 1933, he was leading a gang that carried out a series of bold bank robberies across the Midwest. Dillinger's methods set him apart from other criminals of the time. His gang executed robberies with military-like precision, often planning in detail and using advanced techniques, such as cutting phone lines to delay a police response. He became infamous for violent shootouts with law enforcement, escaping capture multiple times. In one instance, he broke out of jail in Crown Point, Indiana in 1934 by carving a fake gun out of wood and bluffing his way past guards. Stories of these escapes helped create a larger-than-life image of him in newspapers across the country. The Dillinger gang was also responsible for killing several police officers and committing numerous crimes beyond bank robbery. As his infamy grew, the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, made capturing him a priority, branding him public enemy number 1. This was part of the FBI's effort to show its ability to tackle organized crime during the turbulent Depression years, when public confidence in law enforcement was low. Dillinger's criminal career ended in July 1934. After being betrayed by an associate, he was ambushed outside the Biograph Theater in Chicago. FBI agents shot and killed him as he attempted to flee. His death marked one of the first major victories for the FBI in its fight against high-profile criminals. John Dillinger's story, filled with daring robberies, prison breaks, and dramatic confrontations, secured his place in history as one of the most infamous criminals of his era. Ready for the next twist in history? Hit play on the next one.